Hey Amarillo, I'm Jason Boyette, and you're listening to Hey Amarillo, the interview podcast featuring some of the most interesting people and stories of Amarillo, Texas. As part of this podcast partnership with Brick and Elm Magazine, I want to give a podcast shout out to Avant Garden, Alliance Credit Union, and Joseph B. Peterson Edward Jones. Joseph is a former podcast guest. We just finished up our March-April issue of Brick and Elm. It's at the printer now. It should be available this weekend. In the meantime, go check out our new digital magazine e-reader, which is sleek and sophisticated and optimized for mobile. It's really cool. You can find a link to that at brickandelm.com. Today's guest is Meaghan Collier, and I've known Meaghan for several years. You may know her from her years as a local news personality on KAMR Local 4 News. She left TV news in 2020 to become the Communications and Marketing Manager for the Amarillo campus of the Texas Tech University Health Sciences Center. And so we talk about that transition a little, but another thing I really wanted to cover was her volunteer work. Meaghan was named the 2025 Volunteer of the Year at our recent Brickley Awards presentation, and she is involved in so many local nonprofit organizations and events. And so we discuss that. We talk about how she got into journalism in the first place and how a year as an educator in New Orleans transformed her life. Here's Meaghan Collier. Meaghan Collier, welcome to the Hey Amarillo podcast. Thanks for being here.
Jason Boyette, what a monumental occasion that we find ourselves in, that I am on your podcast. What has happened? Have you gone through the entire gamut of people?
There's no one else in Amarillo to talk to. You were last on the list.
I assumed that is what had happened.
It is funny, though, because we talked about the podcast for 2 years every week when you were at KMR. And I know you were listening to it, and it's funny to have you here. So I'm glad that you're here.
Well, thank you for inviting me.
I know you're not comfortable in this
I
setting.
am a nervous wreck. I think I'm going to vomit, but I'll try not to cry, and I'll try not to throw up on your podcast.
Okay, well, people have cried before on the podcast. No one has vomited during the show.
Well,
so
buckle up.
If you cry, that's probably okay. We'll see what happens with the other part. I want to start like I start with everybody, and that's to ask how you ended up in Amarillo. So what brought you to this area?
Well, I grew up in Canyon. I lived in Canyon from the day I was born until I graduated from high school. My parents live in the same house now that they did when I grew up.
Okay.
Across from Wendy's, so which made for exciting times. On Friday night, we could go to the Varsity Theater, and then we would go to Wendy's, So that was a Friday night in Canyon, USA, in high school for me. So anyway, I graduated from high school and I went to OU, which was not the first place I wanted to go. I really wanted to go to Los Angeles. My dream was to leave Canyon and never return, to become famous, of course, because I equated, being famous with making money. And my mom and dad always said, you have to be able to take care of us. So,
and
so
like a good parent.
Right. Exactly.
Give you that pressure at the very beginning.
Exactly. So, my entire life was, how am I going to take care of my parents? How am I going to make a difference? How am I going to be famous? It's so silly to say it, but it is. So I loved writing my senior year, and I really, really discovered my love of writing my senior year thanks to my English teacher, Mrs. Jiwa. And then I also became passionate about government, not necessarily politics, but government. I loved government. And so I thought, well, I think I want to go into politics. I want to go and be a poli-sci major or something like that. And then I started running for student government and all that business, in high school. And I just realized I really didn't like that part of it. But I did like writing.
Okay.
So my dream was to go to college and, become a journalist, to become the next Katie Couric, if we're being honest, right? And so I thought, well, I have to go to Los Angeles because that's where everything happens, is Los Angeles, right? So I got into USC as a double major in journalism and music. I was a French horn player.
Wow, okay.
I was quite good at French horn. I think secretly my parents always dreamt that I would be a music performance, go into music performance. But Anyway,
French horn, not necessarily a path to fame and fortune, though.
Thank you for acknowledging this.
Right.
I think this was like the unlock, right? Like I was like, how can I be famous playing the French horn?
I can't name anyone who's famous.
It's true. It's true. So anyway, I thought, okay, well, I'll just go to LA. And it turns out it's very expensive to go to Los Angeles. And I'll never forget, I went to like an in-person interview, and it was in Dallas because USC came and did like Texas interviews, and they were like, you're from a town with what size population? I remember they were like, this is going to be very difficult for you to acclimate to Los Angeles, right? And so I got in, I was really excited. And then it turns out it was just very expensive. It was not going to work. So my parents were like, we're not going to, like, you can't do it. And I said, fine, I'm just going to go to Oklahoma. Oklahoma, like, basically paid me to go to college there. I played in the band. And I was like, fine, whatever. I'll just go to OU. And turns out my dad had always dreamt that I would go to OU. He was a huge Sooner fan growing up as a little boy. So I went to OU. I had the best experience. It literally changed my life. I majored in journalism at OU. And I really sort of found my person, I found who I was a little bit at OU. And so I graduated from Oklahoma in 2005. And when you are going into news, broadcast journalism particularly, you have to get into the industry very immediately, right?
Right.
I think there's a couple of reasons, honestly. Number one, you start out so green, right? Like
Sure.
you have a very small set of skills, right? And so that, and then number two, you make so little money starting out, And I think that everybody knows that you just have to kind of go in before you have any context of what the world actually looks like, right? So anyway, I was so fortunate that I got my first job at KMR back here in Amarillo. And
that was right out of college, right?
Right out of college.
Yeah.
I mean, I'll never forget, like, Tom Wolfley, he works in sales now, but I'll never forget one of my very first, it was we called it a newsroom shot, right? So it's where you're sitting in the newsroom and you have a story that runs, and then they toss to you and you do a live tag.
Yeah.
And I was sitting on this stool, and I had no idea what I was doing. And Tom Wolfley, who was the assignments editor at the time, ran up, put an IFB in my ear because I had no idea what was happening. And he was like sticking this IFB in my ear, and he's like, go. And then I did this tag. And I mean, I was so green, and I had no concept of what I was doing, but I was so lucky to be able to follow my dream, and do it here at home. So I worked here for a couple of years. And another thing about being in the broadcast journalism business is you work for 2 years. You generally get on a 2-year contract or less. And then you try to make a jump to the next market.
Yeah, which is usually a bigger market.
Mm-hmm. Yes. So the goal is to kind of, there are some exceptions. Some people like to stay for a long time, and that's totally great. But you want to go, generally, you kind of want to make a 40, 50 market jump, to your second market. So I got a job in Colorado Springs, and so that was a pretty big jump. And what was really cool about Colorado Springs was it was really close to Denver. So you got a lot of big city energy too, but you're still in a smaller market. And so I loved Colorado Springs, and it snowed a lot there. And I'll never forget, on May the 13th, there was like a terrible snowstorm. And I was like, I'm not doing this anymore. It's so cold here, I have to get out of Colorado Springs. So I thought about, what could I do? What do I want to do next? What do I want to stay in media? And this was 2007 to 2009. And so that was during sort of the recession, right?
Yeah.
So it was hard to be in media during the recession because, and also it was the onset of social media, right? We still had MySpace back then, right?
But Twitter was launching around 2007, 2008.
Yeah. So like media companies these larger conglomerates are now trying to decide, how are we going to tackle and navigate social media? At the meantime, people are just not spending as much on advertising. And so there were weeks where we would go to work and a person would lose his or her job every day. I mean,
Wow.
it was really volatile, I'm being a little exaggerative, but it was intense, right? Like there were seriously a lot of people were losing their jobs, and I was lucky enough to keep mine, but it just was like this volatility that was crazy. And I remember it was the year Obama was elected, and I think it was his acceptance speech. I don't think it was the inauguration speech. It was one of the speeches. But he talked about how like community service was a key component to like how we can further society and how we can make a difference. And like, what are you doing to be of service to your community? Mm-hmm. And I remember watching the speech and I was just so moved by it. And I thought, am I doing that right now? Like, am I serving my community like I always hoped or thought I would? And I think that I knew I wasn't. You know, I was a morning show reporter, a live morning show reporter. So it was a lot of like goofiness and entertainment mixed in with, you know, breaking news live shots at 5 a.m. in the morning.
Right.
It's snowing outside. There was an overnight murder. You know, like it was like this very crazy mix. I went
and now the chef will come in and show us how to make grilled cheese.
Yes. It was like 3. I had to be at work at 3 a.m. every day, or 3 or 4 in the morning every day. And I got off at noon. And, you know, it was just like crazy. And so I heard this, and I'd always wanted to do something out of college called Teach for America. Mm-hmm. But as I mentioned, you are encouraged to just go straight into the media business. Like there's no dilly-dally. And so I thought, I wonder if Teach for America would accept me now, you know? So I thought, I'm going to apply. So I applied and I was accepted.
Were you about, what, 25 or so?
So this would have been in 2009. So I don't know how old I was. But yeah, I think it was like 25-ish. Yeah. So most of the people in Teach for America come straight out of college and then they get placed. So basically it's non-education majors. And they agree to do a 2-year commitment in like an urban school district or a rural school district where there's just not enough educators.
Okay.
And so anyway, I got in and they said, they gave, you know, you ranked the 3 places you would want to go. And I can't remember, I think I said Denver, Oklahoma City, or Dallas. And they came back and they were like, well, how do you feel about New Orleans? And I was like, gosh, I don't know. I've never been to New Orleans. I don't know anything about New Orleans. The only thing I know about New Orleans was when the Hurricane Katrina folks were evacuated to Amarillo. I interviewed a lot of them when they were here.
This was just a few years after Hurricane Katrina.
Yeah. So this was so Katrina was what?
2005?
Yeah, 2005.
Was it? Okay.
Yeah, because I was I remember being a very, very green reporter interviewing these people that were just being evacuated from New Orleans to Amarillo. So anyway, they said, you know, this is where you're going to go. So I said, okay. So I was certified to teach high school English. So what you do is you pack up your life and you go to a different, like a city. My training was in Phoenix or in Tempe, Arizona. So you go to Tempe in like May or June and you stay there for, I think 8 weeks, something like that. So I'm in Tempe, Arizona. It's 117 degrees. Like I'm not being hyperbolic. Like it was so hot. I'm learning how to be a teacher. At my school, I taught summer school to some high school kids that needed to go to finish their high school English credits to graduate or whatnot. And then you get placed in your actual placement. So then you pack everything up again and you move to your new home. So I got to New Orleans and I could not get a job. They had kind of overhired for everybody.
They didn't have something waiting for you
then. No, that's sort of like, because it's very fluid, right? What teachers are coming back, like blah, blah, blah. So they did not have a specific place for me. So I got there and they were like, okay, if you can figure out how to be math or science certified, that'll be better. And I was like, she knows words. She doesn't know numbers. Like, and so I somehow managed to get certified in like gen ed, like 6, I don't know, some like junior high essentially, right? Like, and then I still couldn't get a job. And so then I started volunteering at a school, and it's what you call a transformation charter school. So what happens is the recovery school district in New Orleans, kind of after all the kids were evacuated from New Orleans after Katrina, everyone started to realize that there was a massive disparity in the education levels that were happening in Louisiana, specifically in like urban areas like New Orleans. That school district was taken over by the recovery school district, quote unquote.
Okay.
And so it was like this temporary sort of like agreement, like government.
Like, was FEMA involved with
no,
that sort of thing?
FEMA wasn't involved with that. It was local. It was like it within Louisiana, but basically they allowed different, we call them networks, to come in and open these charter schools. Or you could write a charter and you could take over one of these schools in the city that was fledgling, right?
Wow, okay.
And it turns out it was a good thing for the city of New Orleans, right? And essentially, they ultimately the most I can liken it to is like a magnet school or something like that. Mm-hmm. So they would come in and they would write a charter for a science and math academy, or they would write a charter for like an arts academy, and so these different networks, charter networks would come in. There's like one called First Line. There's one called KIP. A lot of people have heard of KIP. Mm-hmm. And so they would come in and they would take over these underperforming schools and send them on a path to success. So I started volunteering at this one school. The original school was called Albert Wicker. And it was one of the worst schools in New Orleans. It was, if anybody's familiar with New Orleans, it was on Bienville, which is kind of in the Treme neighborhood. But it was a very, very tough school. These two guys wrote a charter, and one of them is still a very dear friend of mine, and he was a Teach for America alum. They wrote a charter to do basically a college prep, charter school. And so they called it a transformation charter school. So they would come in and exist both with Albert Wicker and then Success Preparatory Academy was what it was called. So the very beginning, the first year, it was K through 3 for Success, and then the rest was Albert Wicker still. And so each year they would take over another grade.
Okay.
Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Okay. So these guys were also like super green, right? Like this is their first year to have this charter school. So I started volunteering, and on my very first day, I walked into a classroom, and the teacher at the time, she said, "Okay, well, it's breakfast. Can you help me with breakfast?" And I said, "Sure. I'm an English teacher, but sure." Mm-hmm. And so she goes, "Here's a bucket. You need to go around and have the children pour their milk into the bucket." And so I walked around to each of these children, and they poured their Cheerio milk into the bucket, like a mop bucket. So that was my first task. And so then I was like, this is gross. This is so gross. The next task was they were going to art or music. It doesn't matter. So they lined up and they went out of the room. And I was sitting there just I have no idea what I'm doing, right? I'm sitting there, and all of a sudden a mouse jumps out of a backpack.
Wow.
And I was like, this is crazy. I have to go tell somebody. So I went next door and I told the male teacher next door, I said, "Mr. Keltz, there's a mouse." And he goes, "Well, that's Josephine," or whatever. They had named the mouse. It was right. It was just part of the experience, right? This exists here. I spent the whole day there. And I think that the teacher, who turns out, Nicole, is now one of my very, very best friends. She saw that I was probably pretty good at classroom management specifically. Okay. And so she went to Neloy, who was the principal, and she said, "We got to get her back. Somehow we've got to find a job for her."
Beyond just milk collection.
Milk collection, yeah. Right. And so they said, "Okay, we need a special ed teacher." And I was like, oh my gosh, this is now my third test that I am about to take, right? And I don't know anything about special ed. So I studied because I wanted this job so bad. At this point, I'm desperate, right? But also I was just so delighted by the mission of the school. Mm-hmm. And so I took the special ed test and I passed it. I studied so hard and I passed it. And so I was certified to teach SPED. Now, during Teach for America, you do the training in the summer, and then you go through a teaching class essentially the entire time. So you are put into a cohort of teachers who are teaching special ed in that region, and then you go and you take weekly classes, and so it's like a continuing education situation. So I got the job. I started with a very small caseload of, I think there were 3 kids. They had some pretty severe learning disabilities, I would say. And, obviously during that time, these are kids that were born sort of during the Katrina, so we don't know what their experience has been, right? Like it's just so varied. And so I started learning a lot about interventions and push in and, pull out and reading interventions and, all these things that you can do to help a kid succeed, which I had never understood because I was I grew up fairly comfortably, I guess. Like we didn't have any money, but my parents thought education was critically important when I was growing up. And so I was very high performing. And so I never really struggled to learn to read, or I never struggled to learn, or studying was just sort of innate. But I started to see like how lucky we, like, oh my God, to have access to books. As I taught, I had the special ed caseload. I was pushing in a lot to Nicole's third grade class. And because a couple of them were some of my kids. And then it just became more and more apparent that the reading gap, the literacy gap was massive in these third graders. And so they just decided to put me exclusively into the third grade class to teach ELA, to basically do reading intervention with these kids because they were so far behind. And I never knew teachers out there are going to laugh, but I never knew what guided reading was because I didn't know what that, we did. Do you remember, what was that thing when we were growing up where you read the little books, accelerated reader?
Yeah.
Do you remember accelerated reader? I knew that, right? But I didn't know anything like how the teaching happened. Do you know what I'm saying? So I started doing guided reading with these kids, and I'll never forget one of my little guys, he couldn't get past. I was like, okay, so let's talk about our alphabet. He couldn't get past C. This is a third grader. He was like A, B, C.
Like he knew that, but
I don't know what comes next. And it was honest and authentic, and it was heartbreaking, And to watch them, Jason, it was so interesting to watch them try to cut with scissors. They don't know how to hold a scissors, it was so stark, the difference, the gap.
How long did this period last? How long were you there?
So I taught there for a year.
Okay.
And this is one of my life's biggest regrets. But also, I don't know. I have a lot of difficulty reconciling my time in New Orleans, to be totally honest with you. But I don't think I was a very good teacher at the time. I think if I could go back and do it again, I think I would be quite good.
Yeah.
I think at the time it was so overwhelming and you have no idea, it's insane what these kids are faced with. But you also have to ensure that they go to school every day and they still get their homework done and they still do their assignments. And we have to make sure that kids are held to high standards, even if they have challenges at home, right? I think that's one of the reasons that the school districts in New Orleans or in urban areas like that do suffer so much. We make exceptions for them, or you know what I'm saying? So anyway, after a year, my dad was diagnosed with cancer back here in Amarillo. And so I came back, it was right at the end of the year, he was having his very first surgery. So this was in 2010. And I came back home to be with him when he had the surgery, and it was kidney cancer. It was this really strange form of kidney cancer. So, but they thought, oh, it's easy, you just take out your kidney. So they did. And then he had another surgery that was not cancer related, shortly thereafter. So I was home for several weeks while Dad was, recovering. And I sort of felt this yearning to be back home with my family. I was also in, I think at the very least, we can call it an unhealthy relationship in New Orleans. It was certainly unsafe. And so I went back to New Orleans sort of at the end of June. And I realized at that point that I needed to leave and I needed to be home with my family. So my friend Faith Miller at the time, if you'll remember, Faith Miller was a main anchor at KMR. She was like, Meaghan, we're going to start this new show. It's called Studio 4. We're looking for a producer. Would you be interested? And at this point, I was like, I think I need to, when you have distance from something, you're able to find context. So I said, I think I need to get home. So I did. I went back to New Orleans. I packed up everything I could and with my dog Miles, and we left. And I came back and I took a job at KMR. We started this new show called Studio 4. It was right when Oprah left the industry. So all these markets across the country were looking for something to fill that time slot. So
something that's not a hard news kind of show that's a little bit softer.
And so they were there was this idea. So Austin had a really successful program. And so we sort of we're trying to replicate, a lot of markets across the country, we're trying to replicate, this lifestyle, this half-hour lifestyle programming. So anyway, I came back and that's what I did. And I've never forgiven myself for not finishing my 2-year commitment in New Orleans.
People will know you for the media side here. And you did that, and then you took that year break in New Orleans, and then you came back and did the media thing. And when I've talked to you about New Orleans, you speak with such passion about it, that was a defining moment for you. And I wonder, fully understand the needing to get out, your dad needing you here, nobody questions that. But I wonder, when you look back on that and you think, maybe you've got regrets about it, but it was transformative for you.
It changed my life.
Yeah. And so how do you think about it now?
I look at it as the most important thing I've ever done. It was the hardest thing I've ever done. And it was probably the thing that I was worst at, but it was the thing I loved more than anything, When I went back and I saw the kids graduate from junior high school to go to high school, it was unreal, to see how far that they had come, that they were still in school. And then, when Nicole would send me pictures of them graduating from high school, and not all of them, went off to college, and they all have gone on to live lives that they've chosen, and it doesn't look exactly like, college. It doesn't look like college for everyone. But to see them turn into adults who it's really special,
Yeah.
And I had one group of kids, that I loved so much, but I have promised myself that because I left early, I would do everything I could to advocate for literacy, advocate for early childhood education, advocate for kids with special needs. And then I also, when I came back, when I was working nights at the TV station, I would substitute teach in the mornings.
Yeah.
Just because I thought it was important to keep my skills, And that was a really, really rewarding experience too, just to continue to stay in the classroom and see what education looks like. And it's just so important. And I will also say that early childhood education is so transformative for kids. And I think that we always think about high school education being such an impactful time. But if kids are not getting access to books and to, reading strategies when they're 3, 4, and 5, they're already so far behind.
Right.
They're never going to, it's very difficult to catch up. And so to really close the education gap, we have to encourage really robust early childhood education programs in our communities.
And that's one thing that was intriguing to me about your story, because people will know you because you were on TV for a long time. They see you in the community, but you've also got this passion that's related to childhood education and books. And that plays out in your volunteering for organizations like Storybridge. People will have seen you in a volunteer capacity at so many different nonprofit events and fundraisers and all those kinds of things. We gave you the Brickley Award for Volunteer of the Year because you are just so involved in so many different things that are not your job, and we can talk about your job in a minute, but is that part when you look back at New Orleans and how it transformed your life? And then you go through a year like the last couple of years where you're emceeing, a dozen events and you're on so many boards. Is that one of the ways that it transformed you?
Yes.
You're all right, I have to do these things. I can do my 9-to-5 job, but I've got to do all this other stuff.
Well, it's so fulfilling. And it really does. It helps me to reconcile my early departure from Teach for America, if I'm being totally honest.
You're trying to make up what you feel regret for.
Yes. Yeah, honestly. But also I think it's I just think it's so important. I think we have really brilliant organizations in this town, nonprofit organizations in this town that are really changing kids' lives. And so if I can be even an ounce of impact or influence on those organizations, then I feel like that's my duty, right? Like that's all of our duty, right? I don't have kids, but I know the future of this community, and having a strong community lies in a strong education system in our communities, whether that's in, small rural Texas, or if it's in cities like Amarillo and larger cities like Lubbock or Canyon or whatever, I will say, I was on a board once, and one of the people said, "Why are you so involved in this organization? You don't have kids." And I was like, "Well, thanks for reminding me." But like, too,
thanks, Mom.
Yeah. I think it's so important for our community to thrive. So
there's a generational problem that a lot of nonprofits have, and that a lot of their funding, a lot of their volunteer base is aging.
It's aging.
Because we have had such a strong cohort of people funding the arts, funding nonprofits.
Thank goodness.
Yes. I mean, for years and years,
Yeah.
From the Harringtons to the Bivens, all of that stuff. You're of a generation that's a lot younger. And I know that you are like taking intentional steps to get your friends and your colleagues and people our age involved in some of these things. And I wonder if that's something that like is strategic for you. You think we need a lot of people who have that younger vision, younger energy. We can't just rely on the older donors anymore.
Well, I think there are a couple of things about that. So number one is I'm tired. No, I'm just kidding.
You need help?
Yeah. No, I'm just kidding. But a lot of us are tired, right? Like, and so we sustainably cannot continue to do the work forever. But number two, these organizations, these nonprofit organizations, and this is something I'm so passionate about, these do not belong to individuals. These belong to our community. They do not belong to the executive director or the board president or the founder, even the founder of the organization, right? Like they belong to the community, and it's important for, if we want these services to continue and we want these services to continue to evolve and to be mechanisms of growth for our town, then we need a lot of different viewpoints and input and, volunteers and engagement. Like in order to continue to serve, we have to engage a larger group of people. Right. And so yeah, it's like, maybe it's a little strategic on both of those accounts, right? Like, we desperately need to continue the idea of service in our community for my generation and the generation following. I think philanthropy is experiencing a bit of a giving gap right now, just across the country. I think there's some fear in nonprofit fundraising and leadership across the country that what are we going to do in the next 10, 15 years, just because, or how do we engage with this next generation of givers? And so I think maybe just continuing that conversation, having an open dialogue with a younger generation is important. Like it's not, giving is not going to look like, and giving of time is certainly, after COVID, the time commitment thing is insane in nonprofits, but it's going to continue to change. Right. Okay. And so we have, if we care about the community, we have to continue giving our time and giving of our resources.
I want to ask one more question. And there's a lot that we haven't talked about. I mean,
I talk too much, Jason.
Well, I mean, you made a switch in 2020 from Studio 4, KMR Media to a communications position with Texas Tech Health Sciences Center. And a lot of people were making career changes during that period.
Yeah.
So that's not news. But I wonder, like, for someone like you who had been in the business for so long, to get on the other side of that, if that was hard, if that was a positive change for you, or if that was like a challenge to kind of make that switch.
Look, people who are on TV like to be on TV. I'm just telling you. Like anybody who says they don't is not telling you the whole truth, right? Like there's a little bit of ego in broadcast news, right? I think it's interesting to be in a profession where there's a lot of people that will like see your daily work every day.
Right.
Right?
You're visible.
You're visible. Your work every single day has an audience. You don't have that in all jobs, right? So it's a bit of a transition, but I'll tell you, so at Christmas of 2019, my dad, his cancer came back, and it came back with a gusto. It was awful. And I was sitting at BSA, and I was just so devastated. Like, how am I going to help? How am I going to fix? I'm not a doctor. Yeah. I'm not a scientist. I'm not a pharmacist. I don't know how to do research, biomedical research, like, what am I going to do to help? And somebody walked by with a T2HSC coat, like his doctor's coat on. And I thought, I didn't even really, I've been involved in the Laura W. Bush Institute for a long time, but I didn't even really think about what T2HSC does in Amarillo.
People don't. I mean, they know it, but like place it within the medical community, like it's hard.
And I thought, I wonder if there's something I could do with them. And I think it was an interesting thing. It coincided with, again, sort of another shift in media and media consumption, and how people interacted and engaged with local media. By the way, I just want to say, I think local media is the most critically important part of an informed society. And I will go to my grave saying how important it is to have a really strong and healthy local media presence in a city. Okay.
Agreed.
But I will say that as media trends change and ownership changes and all of that happens, it becomes harder and harder to do the job the way you want to do it. Right? So that was happening. It also was coming at a time where I was like, I'm not having as much fun as I used to. And then also I was tired of people having a constant ability to weigh in on the way I looked. Anyway, so, all of these things at the same time sort of caused me to want a change.
Yeah.
So I had an interview at HSC, and I took the job, and I left, and it was hard. It was hard to leave something I loved. I love storytelling. I love it so much. And I love being able to take somebody who doesn't think that they have a story and tell a story compellingly. Because everybody has a story, right?
This is coming from somebody who told me that they were going to be a boring podcast guest, but I'll leave that aside.
I'm still sick and shaking, by the way. Anyway, so yeah, it was really hard. It was hard, but I knew it was the right time. I knew it was right. It was time to go.
Was it a good change for you?
It was a really, really, really wonderful change for me. People always ask me if I miss it, and I do miss. The other thing about news is you come in at 1:30 in the afternoon, you turn a story for the 5 o'clock, you have a schedule, and you get to do something from start to the end every single day.
Yeah, you finish a lot of projects.
Yeah, and so I liked that, and I do sometimes miss that. I'll be honest, I miss that sometimes. I miss video storytelling. I love to edit video. It's my favorite thing. But, sometimes I get little pieces of that, little glimmers of that. In my I found other ways in my life to kind of satiate that need.
Okay.
So
last question I want to ask to wrap up this section. You have encountered the people of Amarillo in a variety of different ways. As a journalist reporting on them, as a volunteer with nonprofits, asking them for money, or serving them at Health Sciences Center, where you're communicating all the stuff that's happening there. Like, your immersion in Amarillo has taken a lot of different tracks. And I wonder, like, what you've learned about the people of this area, working with them in so many different ways. And maybe not just Amarillo. I mean, you grew up in Canyon. So, like, we can talk about the Panhandle people.
I think that people here are inherently, I think they're good, right? I think that people do have a strong sense of community. I think they want to support their own. I think that that's very valuable. I think there's also opportunities within that mindset. I think that pretty much in general, people are willing to help here. And that's nice. It's nice to have connections. It's nice to be in a place where you do know so many people, where you can go to the same restaurant and you have those friendships with the bartenders or the people that are sitting at the table next to you, or that you maybe grew up. For example, I love to go to 2606 because I dated Chad and Marcus was my sister's first boyfriend.
Okay.
You know, like those sorts of things are.
That's a very Amarillo sort of.
It's an Amarillo.
thing.
It's like an anecdote, but it's true, right?
Yeah.
And it happens over and over again, and that's both enchanting. It's a lot, you know, but it's also really nice. So I like that part of the people of Amarillo, that we all are very interconnected, and that for the most part, I think that people want good for one another. I will say that I think that people have different ways that they want to achieve that good.
Yeah.
Does that make sense?
I'm reading between the lines that there is a strength in the connectedness we have and in our self-sufficiency. But that self-sufficiency can sometimes be limiting because we're only listening to the voices that are just like our voices. There's a closed off nature toward outside influence, and sometimes that outside influence can be good. Like sometimes there's a rigidity that we get that needs to be loosened up some. Is that accurate for me to
I think
hear in what you're saying?
Yes, that's exactly right. That's exactly right. Right? Like, I get it, right? I get it. But I also think there's room to embrace, to engage, to grow.
This episode of Hey Amarillo is supported by Lazy Boy Home Furnishings here in Amarillo. And you know Lazy Boy as a national brand, of course. But its Amarillo store is independently owned and operated by the Hawkins family. They live here in the area. And here's the thing. They offer a whole lot more than just Lazy Boy recliners. Amarillo's locally owned Lazy Boy Home Furnishings has a ton of products in stock, ready to take home or deliver today. So go to 3636 Soncy to see their showroom. Visit the Lazy Boy of Amarillo showroom today at 3636 Soncy. Okay, I'm back with Meaghan Collier. Meaghan, this is the part of the show I call 8 Straight.
I'm so excited. I've never been so thrilled.
Good. You know 8 Straight. It's sponsored every week by Panhandle Plains Historical Museum and Canyon. It's the largest history museum in Texas, and its collection includes a red, white, and blue original star windmill, which was one of the most popular windmill brands on the Great Plains in the late 19th century.
I grew up across the street from the museum.
That's right. Yeah. So you were right there.
I saw it all the time.
When you weren't going to Wendy's, you were going to the museum.
To the museum.
The restored windmill at the museum is 10 feet in diameter. They sold windmills up to 26 feet in diameter, that brand. You could have bought one for $90 in 1887.
Really?
Yeah.
What a bargain.
Yeah.
I love a bargain.
Well, $1887, maybe a little bit different. But you can see that at the museum or learn more at panhandleplains.org. Okay, when you think of this area 10 years from now, what do you hope for?
Okay, this is controversial, but I honestly hope in 10 years we have a new Civic Center-esque facility. I do a lot of events in the Civic Center, and the city has done its best to maintain it. We have to fix that. I feel very, very strongly about that.
And not just for concerts. Like,
no.
This is
like, for example, yes. Like, I've been to events where the Grand Plaza flooded, or, you know, during Christmas Roundup this year, we're putting buckets everywhere because the ceiling is flooding. You know, where it's time. Also, like, I would love to go see Bonnie Raitt in an acoustically better venue than the auditorium.
Yeah.
No shade, but like, it would be really great. You know, so I feel very, very passionately that we need to do something on that front.
Full agree from this side. Other than wind, what does this area have too much of?
Okay, so Cody and I were talking about this. He said potholes, and I said, I've lived in New Orleans. You don't know potholes until you've lived in New Orleans.
We always have potholes after a snow event. Like, we're in that pothole season because we had 10 inches of snow.
Yes, exactly. I think maybe there's too many cliques and like old boys, old girls clubs, you know? I think that it would be really great if we could stop the gatekeeping.
Okay.
On a lot of different things.
I have heard conversations like that. I'm a white guy, so there's less gatekeeping for me. Mm-hmm. But I have heard people say that enough that I agree that it probably is a problem that we don't recognize enough. And that may be part of the problem why certain generations are not getting as involved in nonprofits or giving of their time or giving of their money because there seems to be sometimes some barriers in the way.
And I don't say that to be snarky or anything, but I do think there is opportunity to open boundaries.
Yeah. That happens in small towns. Mm-hmm. And Amarillo is a big town with the personality of a small town. Mm-hmm. And so that's not surprising to me.
Yeah. Yeah.
What does this area not have enough of?
Well, I'm a vegetarian. I grew up a vegetarian. I know I used to not be able to say I was a vegetarian on TV. But that's
some gatekeeping.
I know, right? I think there's not enough vegetarian restaurants. However, that is a personal thing, and I don't think it impacts that many people, so I will not say that. I do think that we do not have enough, in particular, mental health care providers. That is a massive need. I think it is on our radar now, but as a person who has gone through significant amounts of therapy, I see the value in taking care of your mental health, I think it's so important, and the problem is we don't have enough access. And I think that T2HSC is working to increase access, particularly for kids, like through TChat and things like that. But I think that there's still such an opportunity to bring more mental health care providers to the region, but also just in general, I worry sometimes about the aging healthcare providers in our region, and I worry about how we're going to replace all those and how we're going to be able to care for our aging population, but a growing population too.
Right. Okay. What's your favorite local neighborhood?
So I have two. I love Wolfland. I think I love the idea of being able to walk everywhere. I like the brick streets, especially like it at Christmas. But my favorite neighborhood in Amarillo is like downtown Amarillo on a Sod Poodles game day. Okay. Where there are tons of people downtown. They're walking. I really love walkable cities, right? Because I loved New Orleans. There are parts of Colorado Springs that are very walkable. I like to be able to, go to do something and see people congregating in a space who are not traditionally congregating together. I think that's awesome, and it gets me really fired up to see people downtown and like walking and parking.
It feels like a real city.
And like going and maybe grabbing a drink and then going to the game, or grabbing dinner and then going to the game, or, vice versa. I think that is so awesome. And it's so fun. There's like an OU football game, like you're walking. So I love that.
Okay. What's your favorite local restaurant?
OHMS.
All right.
I love it.
No hesitation on that one.
Nope. Painfully consistent. My goodness. Like the broccoli. How do we live without the broccoli in our life? Also worth noting, they're the only ones in town that have just a fruit and cheese plate and not like a charcuterie board. So I get to eat everything on it. Okay. So there you go.
Okay. What's your favorite local nonprofit?
Oh, so I thought about this because you give us these questions.
Yeah, I give you these questions. Sometimes I say other than your own, what's your favorite nonprofit? But like if I said that to you, we would have to knock like 15 off the list.
I cannot say, I cannot choose my favorite nonprofit because I love them all. But I mean, I will tell you that I'm on the board for Storybridge, for Opportunity School, for Turn Center, for the Lord W. Bush Institute, for Women's Circle at Harrington Cancer and Health Foundation, for the Heart Gallery of the Panhandle Plains, and for the Amarillo Museum of Art. And I am passionate about all of those organizations, and I love them so much. And if you want to know anything more about them, I would be so delighted to tell you more. So is that an okay answer? I'm sorry.
Volunteer of the Year.
I'm sorry, I can't.
No, I that's why I asked it, because I just wanted to see how you handle that one. What's the most underrated aspect of living here?
Okay, this is easy for me. So I think Amarillo is great because if you do want to get away, it's super easy to travel out of Amarillo. And we tell all of our students that are coming to like go to med school or pharmacy school or PT school or nursing school here that it's a very centrally located place, and you can quickly go, somewhere. You can go to the Caribbean, or you can go to California, you could go to the mountains, or you could
be in the mountains by noon or dinner tonight.
Yeah, and so I mean it's so easy to get around in Amarillo. The traffic it takes me 8 minutes, sometimes more, depending on what construction is happening. But it takes me 8 minutes to get anywhere in town. And then if you want to go somewhere bigger or go experience somewhere else, you can. It's easy.
Okay. When was the last time you visited Paladura Canyon?
I went to Paladura Canyon last New Year's Day. My friend Michelle loves to go hiking in Paladura Canyon, and she was doing like the New Year's Day hike, and she made me go with her. We said that we were going to start doing it like repeatedly, and I did not. But I think it's lovely. I love Paladura.
What are the crowds like on New Year's Day? came in?
It was quiet.
Pretty empty?
Pretty empty, to be honest.
Okay, well, now you know. That's the time to avoid all the crowds. That concludes the 8 straight questions. Meaghan, I like to close, as you know, by asking my guests to endorse something. So what's one thing you would like listeners to know about or to experience?
Okay. I have to tell you, I'm going to be like a company gal right now. I would like to endorse Texas Tech University Health Sciences Center. I think that for so many people in this region, if you are receiving healthcare, you are being impacted by a doctor, pharmacist, nurse, or a PT provider who has gotten their education at Texas Tech University Health Sciences Center. Not only are we providing excellent and essential education, but we are bringing in faculty members to provide expert-driven care at our clinics, at our hospitals, and throughout the region. And so I think when we talk about sustainability and creating a pipeline of providers to the region, this is the best way to do it. Yeah. We have residency programs here in Amarillo, and without them, we wouldn't be getting new pediatricians. And we're going to start a general surgery residency in the next couple of years. And that's really in response to an aging, workforce of surgeons, so that we need to start fulfilling those openings and creating more opportunities for healthcare providers in the region. And I think that we're doing that. And I'm just so passionate about the research that's happening in our region right here in Amarillo. And it's really cool to see what's happening and the synergy that's happening between the Texas Tech University School of Veterinary Medicine and T2HSC. We are 2 separate entities, but a lot of our researchers are working together. Because as we know, animal health and human health go hand in hand. Yeah. And so we're able to learn a lot from one another. And I think that the future of research in this region is really strong. And I think that as long as we continue to encourage people to come and get their educations here, then we're going to be able to retain them. It's a great recruitment tool to get once they're in Amarillo, they tend to stay a lot of times. And so I feel really passionate about the work that we get to do over on South Coulter. It's in Amarillo, by the way. Did you know that?
It's right here. Okay, Meaghan Collier, thank you so much for being on the podcast. You survived
Chase.
it.
I don't know. I'm gonna go pass out now.
You go to therapy and talk all about it.
True.
And that concludes the episode. Thanks to Meaghan for the interview. You can learn more about her employer, Texas Tech University Health Sciences Center, at ttuhsc.edu. Thanks to Lazy Boy Home Furnishings and Panhandle Plains Historical Museum for supporting the podcast, and to Angelina Marie for editing every week. And thank you for listening. Hey Amarillo exists on a weekly basis because of listeners like you and the local people who support it financially through patreon.com/HeyAmarillo. Hey Amarillo's executive producers include Josh Wood, Patrick Burns, Barbara and Jim Witten, Jason Burr, Katie Linger, Wes Reeves, Corey Burns, and Cindy Graham. This has been episode 393. My name is Jason Boyette, and I'll see you next week.